Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have for you the video that I was the most excited to film for June, and that is my queer adult fantasy recommendations video. I already did a video like this last year for adult high fantasy written by women and genderqueer folks, and you loved that video enough that it's my second most viewed video for the last year, and also in my top 10, I don't know which space exactly, but in my top 10 for my most viewed videos on my channel in general. And yeah, it just makes me really excited that this video got so much love. And so I guess I just wanted to thank you first of all, and now let's get into a second video of this type, similar but a little bit different. And the ways that this will be different is that in the video last year I talked pretty much about all queer fantasy that I had read up to that point, and because of that I did not really talk about my thoughts on most of the books, and I did not really give any in-depth synopses for any of the books. And so in this video I do want to talk a bit more in depth about all the books. I have 8 books in total for this video, all books that I have read within the past year, so you know, I talked about most other books before that already in the video last year. So because of that, this video might be a little bit longer, and I hope you will bear with me. And also I broadened the entries, I guess, into this video a bit more, because for this video I decided to also include some historical and some urban fantasy books, and I also decided to include some books that were written by men, which I did not talk about in last year's video. But also last year I had not yet read any queer fantasy books written by men that I necessarily wanted to talk about, which this year I have done. So yeah, before we get into today's video, I once again want to reiterate what makes a queer book for me. First of all, if the author is queer or openly queer, which is not to say that I think every author that writes queer books needs to be queer or needs to be out as queer. But if an author is openly queer, then even if there's no queer content whatsoever in the book, that book is automatically queer to me. And then the other 2 criteria I have are obviously if the contents are queer, or if I consider the contents queer, which happens when, first of all, the world building is so queer that it doesn't even matter if any of the characters necessarily are, or any of the main characters necessarily are. Although usually if that's the case, like if the world building is this queer, then there will be at least one main character who is also queer. I have never read a book, I think, where that wasn't the case. And then lastly, obviously, if the main characters or any of the main characters are queer, that is then also a queer book for me. And so yeah, let's get into the books that I want to recommend to you. I will tell you with each book how exactly they are queer, although if I don't say if an author is queer or not, then that doesn't mean that the author is not queer. But with queerness, it's just something where I feel uncomfortable, you know, digging into if an author is queer or not, or if they have ever said that they are queer. So basically what I did for the author is look into their Twitter bio. If it says they're queer, I'm gonna tell you. If not, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have never said that they are queer, but just that they didn't put it into their Twitter bio. So yeah, let's start with the first book, and the first book is one that I will try to keep short because I actually talked about this already in last year's video, but I want to talk about it again because I now have finished the series and it's amazing, and it's the queerest fantasy series that I have ever read, and that is A Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons. What a surprise. As I've said, this is the queerest fantasy series that I have ever read. Pretty much every single character is queer. You even have a queer massive dragon and her queer dragon girlfriend. It's amazing, it's wonderful. And you have gay characters, you have lesbian characters, you have bisexual characters, which is actually the majority of the characters. There's some ace characters, there's transgender characters, there's gender stuff going on that has to do with magic, where characters just, you know, or well, not characters, but races just spontaneously change gender sometimes in their life, or at one point in their life. And then you also have, you know, societal gender stuff going on where I'm not even sure what I want to call the character, if they're non-binary, if they are transgender, because, you know, it's so specific to that society within this world that it's really hard to judge what exactly it is. So there's just a lot, and I love it. So this series, if you have not yet heard me summarize it, in the first book we meet our main character Kieran, and at the very beginning of the story, when we meet him, he's actually imprisoned, and his prison guard demands of him that he tells her his life story. However, after he starts telling his life story, his prison guard is like, no, you're not starting at the correct point, actually let me tell you your story. And so they take turns telling Kieran's life story, and it's very fun, and that's just where the whole series starts. And then there's prophecy about the end of the world, and there's queerness, as I said, and there's a lot of drama and found family and so much going on. I absolutely love this series. I have a full review of this. Actually, I have 2 full reviews of this. One including the last book, one not including the last book, so I will leave that link down below if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on this series, but I can just highly recommend it. And also I will actually leave all the reviews, if I have them, for any of the books that I mentioned down below and up there, so I might not specifically mention that I have a review, but if I have one, you will find it down below. So next I want to talk about The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nhi Vo, who is one of the authors who does have queer in their Twitter bio. So this is the first level of queer with this book. This is a queer, fantastic, magical, fabulism retelling of The Great Gatsby. Our main character, if I remember correctly, is bisexual. And it's really hard to talk about this book because honestly I am lacking the words to describe it, and this is one of those books that's just so beautiful and so just impactful that I feel like anything I say would not be enough to praise this book, basically. First of all, Nhi Vo's writing style is one of the best in the game currently and the most beautiful, and then also the way she writes characters and character depth and the way she spins stories is just otherworldly. It's just amazing and I love it a lot. This was one of my favorite books of 2021. Actually, there's a few favorites on this list, but yeah, this made it very high. Then next I have Starita by Kirsten Hall. Also, by the way, I'm not talking about these books in any particular order, so I'm just talking about them as I have stacked them in front of me. This one is another one with a bisexual main character, and in this one we follow Elfreda, who is an acolyte or a novice in a cannibalistic sisterhood. And then also in this world there's zombies and there's huge magical cats that you can ride on. But anyway, Elfreda is part of this sisterhood until one day she discovers some secrets about the history and about the goings on within the sisterhood, which put her in grave danger and also mean that she has to decide whether she still wants to be part of the sisterhood or whether she wants to change something. And so yeah, this is definitely not one of those books that I would say is an all-time favorite. This is one of those books that I think are really great to pick up if you want something easy, something fast to read, if you want an adult high fantasy that is not too complicated and not too heavy. This is just an easy and fun read with a really interesting world building concept, and I just really appreciate it for that. And also, as I said, bisexual main character, which I always love myself a bisexual main character. I don't get why not all main characters are bisexual or some other type of queer, but you know, just turn all straight main characters into bisexuals. Why don't we? Next, I have another favorite from 2021, and that was The Black Coast, or rather The God King Chronicles by Mike Brooks. I read the first 2 books in this series last year, and I am very excited for the 3rd one, which comes out this month. Although I do still have to reread the first 2 books before I jump into the 3rd one. This one is one of those books where, first of all, the world building is just incredibly queer. We get to meet a lot of different places within this world, and every single place has their own concepts of gender roles, of queerness. is queerness okay or not? Are they homophobic or not? You know, there's societies that are very misogynistic, but at the same time, same gender couples are completely okay, but also they're kind of transphobic. There's societies where they have a bunch of different gender concepts and gender identities, and then there's societies where they are completely egalitarian between men and women. However, they are pretty homophobic. So, you know, you have a bunch of different cultures coming together with different concepts of gender, different concepts of sexuality, and so that just makes for very, very interesting world building. In terms of a synopsis of this series, within the series you have the Black Keep, and the Black Keep is a keep that is set at the coast, and usually regularly they get raided by raiders. I don't know, for some reason my phrasing today is not at its peak performance. But, you know, they get visited by raiders quite often, and so they do also at the beginning of the story. However, at the beginning of the story, these raiders aren't coming to, you know, raid and pillage. However, they are coming to settle and to form a treaty with the people of Black Keep. And yeah, that's the beginning of the story basically. I love the characters in this book, but as you have probably guessed from my gushing at the beginning of me talking about this book, the world building is really where it's at for me, and I just absolutely love it. Continuing on, I have A Master of Jinn by P. J. Clark. This is historical fantasy set in 1912 Cairo, except there's magic and there's jinn and stuff. And basically what this is that it is a kind of paranormal, urban, historical fantasy murder mystery. So it very much takes the form of a procedural crime novel. And the queerness with this one comes with the main character as well. I believe she is lesbian, but I'm not 100% sure anymore. She definitely is sapphic though. And overall, I just love the writing of the book. I love the atmosphere of the book. I love that it's something different in terms of historical urban fantasy. I loved kind of experiencing early 20th century Cairo. It just was a lot of fun. I love the magic, I love the world building, I love the characters, and I really hope, I'm not sure if it's planned or not, but I really hope they're gonna turn this one into a series somehow. Next is a book that not a lot of you will probably be able to read, sadly, and that is Sanguine de Monas by Anna Zabini. Anna Zabini herself is a queer author, and also all of the main characters, I believe, are queer. We have one gay main character, we have a sapphic trans main character, and we have two bisexual main characters. So yeah, I believe all four of the main characters are queer. So this is a novel by an Austrian author. Because of that, obviously it is in German. That is what I meant with most of you will probably not be able to read it. This is urban fantasy set in Vienna, and in this Vienna it's kind of a dystopian Vienna led by a kind of low-key, maybe not so low-key, fascist organization that came into power because there's demons that take over human bodies, and this fascist organization has people as part of it who are able to kill demons and who are kind of half demons themselves. It's kind of complicated, but anyway, it's just an absolutely amazingly written story. I loved it so much, and that comes from someone who does not usually enjoy German fantasy novels, and it's so good. And it's such a pity that this probably will never be translated, because this was not only published in German, but it was also published within an indie publisher in Vienna. So yeah, that's just sad. But anyway, I have to change my battery right now, so let me do that and I'll be back in a bit. And I'm back, and we have two books left to talk about. First, let's talk about The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is the first book in the Burning Kingdom series. The second book will come out quite soon, I believe in August. The second book is called The Oleander Sword. This one is a South Asian inspired sapphic high fantasy. Both of the main characters, I believe, are lesbian and not bisexual, although I can't be 100% sure. And basically we follow a princess who has been imprisoned by her brother, and we follow her handmaid who has a secret. And then there's rebellions, multiple rebellions actually, and secrets and drama and romance, and yeah, I actually really enjoyed this. I would say in terms of the high fantasy stuff, I enjoyed it less. It was not exactly my favorite book. However, what I really loved within this story was the romance between the two main characters. I thought their chemistry was absolutely amazing, and even in terms of the high fantasy stuff, I do think this is a great book actually to get started into high fantasy, because while there are a few factions that work against each other and with each other and so on, it's not too complicated and it's pretty straightforward. So I think this is actually a great fantasy if you want to get started and if you need, you know, the queer spark to get you interested in high fantasy. And lastly, I have the one book that I actually didn't read last year for the first time. However, when I reread it last year, I remembered and consciously realized that it's queer actually, because I don't know, the first time I read it, I did not really have an awareness of queer stuff the way I do now. And so I read it, I didn't bat an eyelash, and I was just like, yeah, of course. But then I reread it last year and I was like, holy shit, every single character in this country is basically queer. And the series I'm talking about is the Crucial Start series by Jacqueline Carey, with the first book, Crucial Start. I'm currently actually rereading book 3, really enjoying it once again. And yeah, this is quite an old-ish, I would say, adult high fantasy. I mean, it's not like old as in 90s, 80s classic high fantasy, but this was published at the beginning of the 2000s. And our main character is very obviously bisexual. And it's not being made a big deal around it, which is a really big surprise, especially for an adult high fantasy series published in the early 2000s, where, you know, queerness in adult high fantasy was basically non-existent. So yeah, in this series we follow Phaedra, who grows up in the night courts, which in this context, the night courts are basically places where courtesans are trained. And one day she is bought by a man named Delani, and he takes her in, he trains her as a courtesan as well, but he also trains her as a politician and as a spy, mainly a spy. And because of that, she gets drawn into the politics of her country, and yeah, the story starts from there, kind of. As I said, Phaedra herself is bisexual, but basically everyone within this series is bisexual or gay or something along those lines, because one of the main mottos of the country is love as thou wilt, I believe. I remembered that correctly. And so yeah, it's like an appreciation of beauty within the series more than anything else, so it does not really matter what your sexual preferences are. However, with Phaedra herself, there's like a big homoerotic subplot that's not just, you know, implied, but that's like actually there between her and the main villain of the series. So yeah, it's just really exciting to rediscover this, I don't know, 7 years after I first read the series. So yeah, I can highly recommend this one if you want to know where queer fantasy got started, in a way, I guess, you know, because I do believe this is probably one of the first, like, you know, properly queer fantasy series, where it's not just one side character or whatever, but the main character is queer. I'm still so happy I rediscovered this series. So, sorry for the mess I look, editing Sarah here, because while exporting my video, I realized that there was one more book that I forgot to talk about. and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is one of those books where actually when I first read this, what I said was I somehow couldn't connect to this book while reading it, but if I read this at the right time, this is going to be a 5-star book. I have not yet felt like it's the right time because next year actually the sequel will be released, so I will just be rereading it before the sequel comes out. But anyway, this is another queer historical fantasy novel that I read in 2021 that I definitely want to recommend. It's a lot of times marketed as Mulan meets the Song of Achilles, which I don't really think is the case. Like, I don't really think those descriptors fitted, at least not the first book. But basically what this book is it's historical fantasy set in, I believe, 14th century China, and we follow a person who was born as a girl, but when her brother and father die, she takes over her brother's kind of life and also tries through that to take over his destiny. And then also there's war brewing on the horizon. There's a general whose story is also maybe intertwined and connected with our main characters, and there's just a lot of elements there. And then also when it comes to the general as well as our main character, whose name I believe was Chu, I forgot how to pronounce the name correctly, very sorry about that. But anyway, when it comes to the general as well as our main character, there's a lot of discussions around gender going on. And, you know, what makes a man, what makes a woman, what about people living in between in a way. And then also the main romance, which very, very much as a side plot is sapphic as well. And then also the author uses she, them pronouns. But I just wanted to have mentioned this because I think it's a shame to have a queer adult fantasy recommendations list and not have this on the list. Also, I feel like I'm kind of starting to lean over here. But anyway, I'm done already, so let's move to the outro. So that was it for my queer adult fantasy recommendations. If you have any recommendations that you want to share with me, leave them in the comments down below. If you have any thoughts on any of the books I mentioned, also leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out as well. Currently we're reading The Stardust Thief, so if you're interested in joining us, then do so in the Discord link down below, as I said. And so yeah, with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!